I started my career as a public servant in 1987. Things were a lot different back then. A gallon of gas was only 89 cents. The average monthly rent was $3.95, and I definitely made less than an Army private first class. The Simpsons and Full House debuted on television. Ronald Reagan said, "President Gorbachev, tear down this wall," which was the same wall in Berlin I had stood in front of 3 years earlier, and that wall came down. Platoon won 4 Academy Awards. Jessica McClure fell down a well in Texas, and we watched for days as they tried to rescue her. Prozac hit the market, and during that year, Colin Kaepernick was born, and we lost Andy Warhol. My first job with the federal government was at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard as a GS-3 temporary clerk typist. In order to get on the clerk typist register to be offered jobs, you had to pass the civil service exam as well as a typing test. The day of the typing test, I was petrified. The typewriter keys had been blacked out, and the story handed to us was all about dinosaurs with archaeological verbiage. So it wasn't even words I could recognize, and we had to do at least 50 words per minute. Every error reduced your speed rating. There were about 30 of us. We finished the exam and had to sit in our chairs waiting at our typewriters while the teacher graded us. I watched her stack 29 tests in one pile and 1 test in another. My heart sank as I knew that meant everyone but me had passed. It was the exact opposite. I was the only one who passed that typing test. She called me up and congratulated me, and I walked out trying not to burst. My combined score from the typing test and the civil service exam was a 97, and that placed me in the top 5 on the clerk typist selection list for the county. Anyone in the top 5 had to be contacted and interviewed for openings. I got the call a few weeks later for a job working as a clerk to support the civil engineers and the Navy personnel working on the USS Nimitz retrofit while it was in dry dock. Our office was a very large 3-story barge in the water at the end of the dry dock. The clerk before me had gotten very seasick, and since I was next on the list, they offered the job to me. It's the only time in an interview where I've been asked if I get seasick. The Nimitz is nearly 1,100 feet long, and the dry dock structure to that, and it's longer than 2 city blocks just to get from the end of the dry dock to the barge. We only had 1 car, plus I wasn't allowed to park on base, and the bus didn't stop at the right place for me. So the red line on the map shows the path I walked to work every day. Luckily, I only lived about 4 blocks from the gate, but it really was uphill both ways. I went uphill to get to the gate in the morning, then down to the barge, and then in the evening uphill from the barge and down from the gate. Needless to say, I was pretty skinny and in good shape back then. We weren't allowed to bring cameras on the base, and cell phones weren't a thing back then, so I don't have any pictures of the office. But there were 2 female clerks on the barge, me on the non-nuclear side, and the other lady on the nuclear side, which was fenced and locked as it was the top secret side. Everyone else was a male sailor or a man in a hard hat. Master Sergeant Heine made sure to look out for me and kept the sexual harassment to a manageable level while I was on that barge. Once I started walking home, though, I was on my own. We women put up with a lot back then. I was thankful for my job, but most of my duties were done in the first hour of the day, opening the mail, and the last hour of the day, the daily report for the commander. The rest of the day, I was bored. My boss told me to just type letters to my family or read a book, do anything to look busy. I didn't feel that was right, so I started cleaning the barge and looking for another job. After about 6 months of working at the dry dock, I heard about another temp job at the supply center. I asked to transfer, and this was so much better. The walk was reduced by at least a mile. The building was air conditioned and clean. I didn't have sea legs at the end of the day from walking a barge that was constantly rocking. I could wear nice clothes and not worry about them being ruined at the end of the day. And I had a great coworker and supervisor in Dawn. She showed me the ropes and really wanted the best for me. We had great fun. The job was customer service for those placing supply orders. We worked with both civilians and military personnel. There was always a lot of work to do, so the days went by fast. Plus, in 1987, they allowed flexible work schedules, so I could adjust my day without even having to tell her. As long as I arrived between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. and left between 3 and 6, they allowed me to manage my time. We worked with deliveries going to Japan, Germany, and other bases around the world, and often made calls to many time zones throughout the day. The most common error with orders was that someone wouldn't pay attention to the quantity type. For instance, if the quantity is each and you order one, you get one. But if the quantity is a dozen or 100, you better make sure you ordered the right amount. My favorite memory at this job was the sailor who came to our desk in complete panic. He was talking so fast and we had to calm him down. He said, "You've got to help me. I placed an order for nuclear missile heads for the submarine, and instead of 1 dozen, I ordered 12 dozen. The commander's going to kill me." We were able to fix it for him pretty quickly, and he walked away with relief. I loved that job and wanted to stay, but there weren't any permanent openings. One day, when I got home from work, I found a postcard in the mail from a place called Farmers Home Administration. They were offering me an interview because I was still in the top 5 on the civil service list in the area. I didn't know what Farmers Home Administration was. I looked it up in the phone book, but that wasn't helpful. So I called and asked. We didn't have Google. It wasn't the best first impression I could have made. "Hello, I'm calling about the postcard you sent me. Is it for real? Do you really want to interview me for a permanent job? I'm not familiar with Farmers Home Administration. What do you do?" Like I said, not a great first impression, but they scheduled the interview and I practiced responding every day until I got there. When I arrived, the lady who interviewed before me was the same clerk who had gotten seasick on the barge, so I knew she must have also been in the top 5. I interviewed, and a few days later they called me. They said, "We offered the job to someone else, but she declined, so we'd like to offer the job to you if you're still interested." It didn't feel great being the runner-up, but I later found out that the person they offered it to was the lady who got seasick. I pretty much owe her for the 2 biggest opportunities in my career. I started with rural development in April 1988 and took an oath to the Constitution, which I have tried to uphold every day since. The week I started with FMHA, every temporary employee at the supply center got a pink slip on Friday that they had to be out by noon. I was so thankful for the Farmers Home Administration offer, or I'd have been unemployed. Our office was just across the sound from the shipyard. This is literally the view from our office. I was able to see the Olympic Mountain Range, the Puget Sound, and the shipyard with the Nimitz in dry dock every single day. I spent the next 9 years in the Port Orchard office. The first year was rough. Having come from Department of Defense, which had the best technology, to Farmers Home Administration, which didn't seem to even believe in technology. Even though we had a copier in the corner, they made us use carbon paper until it was gone because we didn't want to waste any money. We were the only all-woman office in the state, the busiest housing office in the state, and we won the most awards in the state. We always had at least 40 applications in process at any one time, closing about 20 a month. It amazed me how long carbon paper lasted, and I secretly began throwing sheets away when no one was looking. It was a great day when it was finally gone and we could just use the copier. After about a year of learning the ropes, I decided to get serious about this as a career. I went to night school for a few years to learn about escrow, title, property ownership, and other realty classes. I asked to be sent to any training that was being offered and started networking with people in the state that I respected. I worked up from a county office clerk, which we would now call a loan originator, to an assistant county supervisor or loan approval official. The day we got a fax machine was a big day in the office. We all stood around wondering how it worked. It was amazing to get a VOE in a few minutes instead of having to wait for the mail. Our processing times improved considerably. Unfortunately, no one told us the print would fade in the light, and within a week we realized that every fax we received needed to be copied immediately. Thank God the carbon paper was gone by then. I approved a lot of loans in that Port Orchard office. I think my favorite and most memorable was to Dean Nail. He was a participant in a self-help group who built his own home and later became their construction manager. He's now the director of the single-family housing programs, including that self-help program where he built his house. It's always great to witness the customer's success stories, especially over multiple generations when you make a loan to the parents and then later to their children. The hardest denial I ever did was to a single man. Back then, we made an appointment for you to come in and would discuss your application and the decision with you before sending a denial letter. I told him he wasn't eligible, and he started pounding on my desk and yelling at me and threatening me. I was scared, but tried to calm him down. Then he starts sobbing, and through his tears says, "You don't understand. If I can't get a house, I can't have custody or visitation with my kids." We talked more about it, and I told him what he needed to do to be eligible and come back and reapply. I learned a huge amount of empathy that day and was more forgiving when people got angry about not being eligible. We never know what someone is going through and how our decision can change their lives for better or worse. In 1981, mortgage interest rates were at about 20%. A lot of our customers had double-digit note rates and were getting $500 to $600 a month in subsidy. I was servicing those loans in my early days with the agency. The hardest servicing appointment I had was with a woman and her 3 children. I really didn't want to talk about the foreclosure with her kids present, but she said she didn't have anyone to watch them and didn't want to leave them alone in our foyer. So she brought them in my office and we talked about the house and the impending foreclosure. I told her that she shouldn't wait for the foreclosure to happen, that she should try to sell the house, take the money from it, and start over. Then come back again and reapply. She cried, the kids cried, and honestly, I cried too. She left my office with her kids in tow and my heart was broken. But she took the advice and sold the house. And about 3 years later, she walked into the office and asked if I was in. She gave me a huge hug and told me that appointment was the worst day of her life. But she thanked me for being honest with her and not mincing words. She said that was when she hit bottom and she determined never to be there again. She used the money from the sale of the house to go to school, and she had just graduated with a nursing degree. She had bought another house with the guaranteed program. I cried again that day because it meant the world for her to come back and tell me that. My worst 504 application was the gentleman referred to us from social services. His caseworker and I went out to the shack he was living in. He literally lived in an 8x10 shed covered with blackberry bushes. When we arrived, he didn't answer the door, but we could hear a radio playing. The caseworker looks at me and says, "You might not want to stand in front of that door. He doesn't like women and he always carries a shotgun." I just looked at him and said, "Thanks for telling me that now." We called out to him, but there was no response. The caseworker ended up breaking down the door with the lug wrench from my car, and we found he had passed away probably a few days before. We had to wait for the police and the EMT to come, and they took our statements. Of course, we didn't have cell phones, so I couldn't call the office. And when I got back to the office, they asked me, "What took you so long?" I simply said, "The applicant was dead." My supervisor gave me the rest of the day off, and I think that might have been the last 504 application I ever processed. My favorite 504 application was an elderly woman who may have been 4'7" if you counted the white bun on top of her head. Her name was Beulah Butts. She and her husband had been missionaries, and she was a widow. She only lived about a block away from my house, though I didn't know her when she applied. She qualified for a loan grant combination, but she was mortified to have a loan because she didn't want to leave any debt to her children. It was only $500 spread out over 20 years, and the payments were like $1.50. But she said she would forgo buying groceries in order to pay it back faster. I asked her, "Please don't do that, because I'm going to get in trouble. It's going to look like you don't need a grant." And trust me, based on her budget, she absolutely did need a grant. We did her repairs, and she was so pleased. Then her payments started. She was true to her word, and she paid off that loan in 6 months. I knew I was going to get in trouble over that one, but luckily it was never pulled for a review. She was a pretty amazing woman. After her loan was paid off and she technically wasn't a borrower anymore, I would take my kids down to Beulah's house and we'd help her mow the lawn and rake her leaves. She always had sandwiches and lemonade for them. I served as the Disability Employment Program Manager on the Equal Employment Opportunity Advisory Council and was the liaison to the State Director on EEOAC matters. During that time, HIV and AIDS was just beginning to emerge, and we didn't know what it was or how to treat it. All we knew is that if you got it, you'll die. It was a very scary time. I remember when Princess Diana touched people with AIDS, and that helped everyone have more empathy. But I had forgotten until recently that Dr. Anthony Fauci was the leading scientist trying to figure out the AIDS epidemic crisis. I was sent to training and was supposed to come back and train our staff, but like today, a health issue turned into a political issue and we weren't allowed to conduct the training in our states. Since I had forgotten some of the details from then, I went back and did research and came across this method that Dr. Fauci used in the clinical trials. He basically was against the protesters originally, but then as he thought about it, he started meeting with them and asked what their opinions were, and he developed a new clinical trial as a result. I can really appreciate this method because it goes back to empathy for our customers. We can tell customers what to do based on the rules we have, or we can choose to listen to them and then change our approach to meet the needs of our customers. I certainly don't think of myself on any level close to Dr. Fauci, but if I've done nothing else these last 35 years, I hope I've done this. Listen to our customers, both internal and external, with empathy, and work to change our approach to meet their needs. A lot of events happened while I was in the Port Orchard office, but the two most important for me were the births of my children, Kenny in 1990 and Katie in 1992. Nothing has impacted my life more than my beautiful children, and everything I have done has been for them. A favorite quote of mine is, "The most important work you will ever do is within the walls of your own home." And it's so very true. Work can put many demands on you, but in the end, your family is all that matters. Also during this time, I was looking for someone to mentor me and help build my career. There were successful men I could ask in the agency, but many of them had made comments about women in the workplace, and so I was less inclined to ask them. I reached out to a woman in leadership who I respected. When I asked her if she would be my mentor, she told me that she had had to learn the hard way and I'd have to do the same. The response stung, and I pledged from that day forward to be a mentor to anyone who asked. If you ask me a question and I know the answer, I'm going to give it to you to the best of my ability, because the job is bigger than me. Sharing our knowledge grows the program and helps our customers. Holding the knowledge only tears everything apart. Later in life, I heard Madeleine Albright speak this quote, and I could totally relate. In my opinion, I think it's even more meaningful to say people who don't help other people. She and I had another thing in common. We both wore pins on our lapels, and they often held meaning for the day we were facing. In the 90s, the agency also went through several name changes and a few restructures. Seemed like every year I was ordering different business cards. During one of those changes and just before the Port Orchard office was closed, we had a state meeting over Halloween. The agency name at that time was RECD, which stood for Rural Economic and Community Development, and we called the agency RECT for short. Our soon-to-be closed office decided to be the RECT cheerleaders for the costume party that year. We made our costumes, and the raw shirt cracks me up to this day because it so exemplified the sarcasm we were feeling at the time. The most productive office was being closed. In the mid-90s, a decision was made to establish a centralized servicing center, known as CSC, to service our portfolio. Prior to this, all of the payments were collected, posted, and payoffs quoted from a field office. To transfer our files to CSC, we had to go through every file and fax certain essential documents. We were at that fax machine for days on end, faxing documents, waiting for the confirmation, and faxing again. We had about 800 customers in our portfolio, so it was a huge project to do on top of our daily duties. Then, to establish CSC, they needed staff. About a third of our staff took jobs in CSC, and we lost full-time employees in our state, which meant that offices were closing. The Port Orchard office, which again was the busiest and most awarded office in the state, was one selected to close. I was the wage earner for my family and was terrified not to have an income. I applied for 5 different jobs, including state loan specialist for single-family housing, the one I was most qualified for. However, they chose me to be a community facilities loan specialist who would cover the west side of the state. I could work from home, but only if I had a separate office space, so I converted my shed to an office. We added power and phone lines, I insulated and sheetrocked and laid carpet after work till all hours of the night to get it done on time. I worked in community facilities for a year, and while it was interesting and challenging work, I was on the road constantly and away from my kids too much. So when the single-family housing state loan specialist job was advertised again a year later, they never filled it. I applied again, and this time I was selected. I guess working a year in a program I had no idea about was the key. In the fall of 1998, I moved to Olympia with my children and started working in the state office as the single-family housing state loan specialist. I worked in the state office as the state loan specialist for almost 10 years. We went from having a huge desktop computer to laptops, heavy laptops, but laptops nonetheless. Google started, and it was amazing to be able to search for information. We all thought the world was ending in Y2K, but here we are. Seemed like technology use and the internet really exploded during these 10 years. I enjoyed bringing the kids into the office for Take Your Kids to Work Day. In 2003, my daughter Katie wrote an essay about her experience, which read in part, "It's fun to work at the USDA. My favorite thing is to use the copying machine. She's my girl for sure, and she can thank me for getting rid of all that carbon paper and opening the door of opportunity for her to use the copier." Work played a role in my life on 9/11. We were in Phoenix, Arizona for a policy meeting. I had turned on the television in my room while getting ready and was horrified to watch the footage. At first it seemed like just an accident. Then I saw the second plane hit. This is the actual newspaper that was delivered to my Crowne Plaza hotel room the next day. I still have it. Many staff left via rental car or government vehicles they had driven, but we couldn't leave because all of the planes were grounded for the week. It was a terrifying time, but everyone came together to support each other and help where they could. The bright light of the week was that my nephew Brody was born, and I was able to meet him. The flight home was scary, and when we landed, literally everyone on the plane applauded, and many tears shed as we walked into our home airport. We took the day off from work and school to watch the Olympic torch run through Olympia. We had staff trainings where we tried to have fun by celebrating holidays and the seasons. And we attended Habitat for Humanity events, which were entertaining and enjoyable to share with our family, but also a way to network with their leadership about partnering with us. Fast forward 20 years from some of those events, and we now have a formal standing meeting with the National Habitat, working to refine that partnership nationwide. We had work days with our self-help groups and helped the families build their homes. Sometimes, like this work day in Yakima, we worked in triple-digit heat and gained a lot of respect for the families who spend 9 to 12 months in all weather conditions building their homes. There were many big check presentations to our 523 self-help grantees and annual self-help network meetings where we gave training, networked with our offices and grantees, and presented awards to recognize the hard work being done in our communities. I even experienced an earthquake while working with one of our partners. I was at the RCAC office in Lacey, Washington, planning a training event when the earthquake hit. I dove under the table and held on while it dragged me across the floor, and I watched the door jambs twist and turn. Immediately after, I got in the car and headed to the kids' school to make sure they were okay, because the phones were out. My son was in the advanced science class that day, which was held in a portable building full of glass beakers and science equipment. I burst in the door and he said, "Oh my gosh, I knew you would show up." I told him I loved him too and went to check on my second grade daughter, who was so excited to have lived through an earthquake that she wanted to stay, hoping it would happen again. Our house wasn't damaged, but so much of our town was, especially the upheaved roads, and it took years to get things back to normal. We celebrated Christmases together, and while we worked hard in the state office, the building went all out for Halloween. Natural Resource Conservation Agency, the Forest Service, and Rural Development came dressed up each and every year. My costumes of a 1970s secretary, a gypsy, a flapper, and a rocker chick merely blended in with all of my crazy fun coworkers. Did I mention we had fun at Halloween? Are you sure? We also faced heartache. I had finally been granted permission to stay home with my son on his chemo days to work from home. I was just getting ready to log on to my computer when the phone rang that morning. Becky was crying and I asked her what was wrong. She said that Rose had passed away in her sleep that night. I was serving as the acting program director at the time because our director's wife had just passed away from cancer. Rose's death was so sudden, and I knew I had to be there for the team, so I went into the office and we grieved through our shock. Rose was Catholic, and her family would host a dinner each night for a week to say the rosary with her priest before her burial. We called her family and told them we would like to serve a meal one night. Rose had always cooked for us. Whether it was getting up to make fresh donuts or making lumpia or pancit for a special treat, she always put others first. So we knew we had to cook a meal for the Manabusans. They told us to expect 100 people. Our team cooked for far more than that. When we arrived, they already had a huge spread of food, and they were shocked by how much we had brought. We simply said we loved Rose. It's strange to say this, but as her coworker and then her supervisor, I felt a responsibility to keep her safe, and somehow I felt I had failed her. I know that's not the case, but at the time, it's how I felt. We basically closed the state office the day of her funeral so that we could all attend. It was the worst day of my career, standing there as she was buried. Years later, my washing machine broke down. I was running late from a meeting that went long, but made it home in time to meet the repair person. I apologized and she asked where I worked. I said, USDA, Rural Development. She said, oh, my cousin used to work there. And I said, really, who's your cousin? Rose Manabusen. I cried and hugged her and we shared memories of Rose. She said they were shocked at how much food that we had brought, and I said we were surprised you had so much already. She said, we didn't think you'd realize how many people would attend. But I said we knew Rose and how much she loved her family and others, and we loved her so and wanted to do right by her. I'm not sure if I got charged for the extra time she spent at the house sharing memories, but it was worth every penny having someone to talk to who knew Rose like we did. The most meaningful thing that happened to me as a state loan specialist was in 2008 when I was told that we were having a meeting and I had to attend. It had been a rough year. Our area had experienced severe flooding and we'd worked with FEMA to help disaster victims. My husband's brother had passed away suddenly, my supervisor's wife had died from cancer, our friend and co-worker Rose had died in her sleep, and my son in his senior year of high school had been diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. He'd recently had surgery to remove the lump and was soon to start chemo. I was serving as the acting program director while my supervisor was on bereavement leave. If I didn't write it down, I wasn't going to remember it because my brain just wasn't working right. So I put the meeting on my calendar. At the appointed time, I walked down to the conference room and was surprised to find so many people gathered, but I brushed it off to my bad memory. Then I heard my name called and was asked to come forward, and my teammates proceeded to tell me that they had nominated me for the Eric Joshua Award for Excellence in Government Service. This was a special award that the servicing office had started in honor of Eric, who had died from cancer several years prior and who was known for his customer service. I was speechless. It's one thing to have your supervisor recommend you for an award, but to have your co-workers come together in a nomination is quite another. They said in part, rather than complaining about things, she looks for solutions and creates tools for us to increase efficiency and customer service for both internal and external customers. She's a problem solver. If she sees a weakness, she initiates change. She's always open to new ideas that will improve the delivery of our program. She's creative in her approach with customers and coworkers and has positive results. She continues to be dedicated to the mission of the agency and its delivery to the public. She always goes the extra mile to see that a task gets accomplished to the best of her ability. I've always thought that funerals were somewhat of a waste because we should tell each other how we feel about them when they're alive. This day, my coworkers had held my wake, and I couldn't be more grateful that they shared with me that day how my desire to uphold the oath I took in 1988 was visible, that they could tell that I took it seriously, and they took the time to nominate me for this award. I tear up every time I think of that moment, and I will never forget it. I started out as the program director for both single and multifamily housing programs. I had a big learning curve when it came to multifamily housing, but we met regularly with partners and customers to hear what was and was not working and tried to make changes. In the early years, we also had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or ARRA, funding due to the housing market crash, and there was always more work than we had people to do it. But the team managed to spend the bulk of the additional dollars, and we gained some great team members like Jean Jansen and Cindy Robertson during those years. Later, the position was split into 2 director positions so that each program could have the attention they deserved. I loved the challenge of the multifamily housing programs, but decided to stay with single-family housing. We continued our traditions of celebrating groundbreaking, like this event in Paulsbo, Washington, work days to help raise walls on new homes like these in Silverdale, Washington, and completed neighborhoods like this one, built by homeowners on Orcas Island, Washington, and made sure to take the time to train with and celebrate with the people willing to partner with us to create affordable housing, like this group of rural development staff and self-help housing providers. We handed out more big checks to keep the programs going and growing. And let me take a moment to tell you about Ed Peterson and his work at Housing Hope. He didn't start out in housing, but in his counseling work, he realized that many mental health problems stemmed from the lack of or stress about finding affordable housing. He recognized that a combination of affordable housing and support services could provide families the opportunity to become self-sufficient. So he brought together a group of dedicated people from his community to try to solve the problem. That was in 1987. Today, Housing Hope offers emergency shelters, affordable rental housing, and homeownership opportunities, along with case management, employment services, adult education, credit and homeownership counseling, child development programs, and daycare services, as well as a teen parent program. They support and serve Snohomish County, Washington with a full range of services, operating 541 affordable housing units in 23 locations in the county, and they've assisted 328 families to build their own home. Ed Peterson exemplifies Margaret Mead's statement, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." There are so many people like Ed and his staff working in affordable housing. I wish I could introduce you to the dedicated people I have known and worked with over the years, but I encourage you to look them up in your own community and get involved to change the world. I also served as the multifamily housing program director for several years and was fortunate to be present for the opening of many new affordable units, renovated units, senior housing, and farm worker housing. Developing affordable rental housing can be even more challenging than home building because the property needs to be built, maintained, and yet remain affordable to low-income residents. I was fortunate to work with some very creative developers like the Office of Rural and Farm Worker Housing and Catholic Charities. Whether they were building from the ground up, converting an existing building into housing, or installing a solar panel farm on site to generate revenue, there were some very creative people working hard to make affordable, sustainable rental housing available to low-income households and seniors. In 2011, we held a dual celebration, completion of a self-help group and Earth Day. The children put their hand and footprints onto a commemorative sign, we planted trees in their yards, and we finished off the day with ice cream. Celebrating the successes and having the kids show you their new room while their parents start moving in is always a joy. The General Services Administration, or GSA, decided the state office needed to be remodeled, which basically meant smaller offices and less community space for everyone. But rather than letting us work from home during the remodel with our laptops, they made us all work on banquet tables in the conference room. The entire state office packed up their offices, put their things in storage, and then all 30-something of us crammed into a conference room to work for several months. Of course, the housing staff turned it into an adventure. We launched into Swing Space, the temporary frontier, decorated our tables, and got to work. After surviving that ordeal, we designed I Survived Swing Space t-shirts, which my son made, and we threw a big party when we could finally move back into our normal but smaller workspace. One of the world events during this time was a devastating tsunami which hit Japan in 2011. About a year later, we were walking the beach and found items from Japan washed up on the Washington coast. Items as delicate as a light bulb in perfect condition, a laundry basket covered in barnacles, a rice paddle from someone's home, a small flip-flop. It was amazing how the currents could carry things so many thousands of miles away without any damage. Just in case you forgot, we really loved Halloween. During my time in the state office, I drove across Washington state, crisscrossing to events and meeting with our team. Whether on the coast, the mountains, the city, or the valleys, I enjoyed the beauty of our state out my windshield and sometimes even in the rearview mirror. The ancient falling down barns, the Columbia River, a storm rolling across a wheat field, the Palouse, the mountain pass, or a sunny day when the mountain is out just can't be beat. In all my time with USDA, my heroes have been the staff I've worked with. You will never meet a more dedicated group of people invested in affordable housing. I have seen them work long hours with outdated technology and the lack of adequate staffing. I've seen them use their own funds to buy supplies for a gathering or to make an event special for a homeowner or their teammate. They don't always wear capes, but they will always be my heroes. There were also the occasional marauders. We knew who we needed to hide the candy dish from. We celebrated in traditional ways like birthday lunches, but also in very quirky ways, giant ham sandwiches for birthdays and chipmunk awards for chasing that rodent out of the storage warehouse. Attending Housing Washington was an annual event where all the federal, nonprofit, state, philanthropy, and even for-profit housing providers gathered to learn about and try to solve housing issues in Washington. The event alternated between the east side and the west side of the state. Rural Development was there to represent our single-family and multifamily housing programs, network, and garner new ideas. Ugly sweaters were all the rage at Christmas, and of course it was the single-family housing team who started the annual contest and often won it. The single-family housing staff were amazing, but they loved to play tricks on me. I was often photoshopped into odd settings, and once they even replaced me with a very large zucchini, which they named Tamzini. We tried real hard to make our state meetings fun. One year we invited an improv instructor. He taught us to find a way to say yes, and when you fail, raise your hands high, let everyone know about your failure and celebrate it, and then try again. The management team cooked breakfast for everyone that year, and we shone like rock stars that meeting. Having fun was important because so many times the work was hard and heart-wrenching and emotional. In Washington, we worked closely with the State Disaster Assistance Team and FEMA to help our citizens impacted by floods, forest fires, and other natural disasters. In March of 2014, a devastating landslide hit Oso, Washington. One of our guaranteed rural housing customers, Amanda Lennick, a nurse, had only been in her home a few weeks. She had called a plumber to come work on the hot water heater, an electrician, and a dish network technician to do work that morning. She and the plumber were buried by the landslide. The guaranteed housing staff were so upset. They said if we wouldn't have worked that overtime to approve her loan, she wouldn't have been in the house yet. But in the newspaper, her father said how grateful he was that she had bought her house because it had been her lifelong dream to own her own home. 39 people were killed in that landslide. 2 remained missing in 100,000 yards of material. It was an impactful moment where we realized that the work we do does matter, even in natural disasters. I was asked to serve on the Partnership Alliance team, which meant quarterly flights to St. Louis to meet with other program directors and representatives from our servicing office. During those meetings, we discussed challenges which adversely affected our staff or our customers and developed strategies to modify our processes. Roger Glendinning was the director of the servicing office at that time, and his quiet yet firm leadership helped us accomplish many improvements. I can assure you that a trip back from the servicing office just isn't complete unless you've sat next to a monkey with diamond stud earrings who wants your peanuts the entire flight, especially when there's an Ebola outbreak at the time. There's just nothing like it. The next big project was the Lean Six Sigma process improvement of the 502 direct programs. Under Kathy Glover's leadership, Scott Nista, Migdalis Bernier, Tony Heminger, and I met each month with the Lean Six team for about 6 months to map out the 502 direct loan process and look for ways to streamline it. After mapping the existing process, we invited about 30 of our partner agencies and staff from the field to review the process, our recommendations, and map a final process. We identified approximately 80 items to implement, and over a 2-year period, all of the changes other than replacing Unify were implemented. Unify needed funding, and that was hard to come by. The Lean Six meetings were grueling, especially on top of our regular jobs, but Tony, Scott, and I found ways to relax a little in the evenings. Besides the truffle popcorn, my favorite memory was walking back from dinner on a hot, humid St. Louis evening. It was Scott's birthday, and we were all tired from the long day and the walk back. So about halfway to the hotel, we hailed a horse-drawn princess carriage to give Scott a ride back for his birthday. I have never seen him turn so red in the face. When I left the state office to work at national office in 2015, my staff filled my office with balloons that had messages on them. It was so hard to leave that job and our amazing, incredible team, but it was time for a new role, and leading the implementation of the process improvement was on my horizon. This team had built a housing program together that shone brightly. In our biggest year with single-family and multifamily combined, we invested nearly $850 million into the Washington economy in the form of rental assistance, loans, and grants for the construction and repair of single-family homes and multifamily housing properties. We all had our strengths and our weaknesses, but we lifted each other up as a team. One of the most meaningful things one of my staff ever said to me was, "I like working for you because you look for our strengths and let us focus in those areas." It helped me realize that even through my many insecurities over the years, I hadn't turned out like the person who refused to be my mentor. That promise to myself I had kept. During my time in the national office, we experienced some crazy history in the making. It's a good thing we finally had the technology to get us through all of that working from home. Andrea and I left the state office building and moved over to the Forest Service laboratory. They gave us a warm welcome as we moved in. We had a great view, and deer would walk by nibbling the grass occasionally. The office was very quiet since it was full of scientists doing research either in laboratories or out in the forest. Of course, the very first thing we did was continue the Halloween tradition in our little 2-person office. We were the Frozen sisters and kept singing, "Let it go, let it go." There were more self-help meetings, this one in San Antonio, full of Tony Hernandez ta-da moments. I was able to be in DC to see the cherry blossoms one year and experience a fire drill, which is basically about 1,000 or so people flooding out of the USDA building onto the National Mall. We probably looked like a bunch of lost protesters. After about a year of sharing an office with Andrea, we were approved to work from home full-time. So I set up an office next to my loyal buddies who usually napped quietly, unless of course I was on a Teams meeting or giving a training. We got to see our first solar eclipse. Boy, was that freaky. We were able to participate in staff and packager trainings with coworkers from various states, and somehow I became known as the adventurous eater. Seems like all anyone talks about is that I'm willing to eat sushi and, God forbid, octopus. I was able to work with amazingly talented people in the national office, and I even got to sneak in a trip to the Kennedy Center once to see the Nutcracker. From July 2017 to July 2018, I traveled to 12 states and met with staff from 26 different states to provide loan approval official training, while also doing my regular job and giving packager training in multiple states. That was a whirlwind of a year, and my suitcase stayed packed most of the time. But the staff training was so well received, it gave us a platform to stand up the Single Family Housing University training program. Sometimes the hotels, airports, and the travel were dizzying, and there were days I had to think about which city I was in. But there is nothing like flying over the Puget Sound, ablaze with a sunset, or the Cascade Mountains covered in snow, to make me know I was home, which was always the best place to be. In 2020, the pandemic hit, and many more of us started working from home. Store shelves were empty. I remember in a staff meeting I told my coworkers, "I don't know what's going on, but we can't find toilet paper out here. If you say it out your way, you might want to stock up." Some of them took the advice and were glad when their region was hit as hard as we were. We made and donated masks, prayed for a vaccine, and to keep my grandmother safe, we celebrated her birthday separated by glass. COVID forced us all to learn how to use Zoom and team meetings. Who can forget the guy who showed up in court with an attorney who had the cat filter on and couldn't figure out how to get it off? There was a lot of times I was accidentally on mute, but thank the Lord I was never the cat filter. I've served under 7 presidents, some more than once, and voted for 5 of them at least once. The only time I remember watching an inauguration in the office was for Barack Obama. It was such a historic moment. Many of us from the USDA Service Center gathered in a conference room to watch it on a portable television. The reception wasn't great, but I felt a tear stream down my cheek as he was sworn in. For me, it was a moment of hope that we could perhaps end the racism our country had so long struggled to overcome. What amazed me most, though, was how my children saw it as no big deal, because anyone should be able to be president, Mom. I felt proud that they could see it in that manner. Of course, with each administration, federal servants typically face a change in the way we do things. We have to deliver new initiatives, switch over to new logos and templates, deal with new budgets or lack thereof, hope that we won't be reorganized again or face staffing cuts, and abide by the Hatch Act and not share our feelings on political subjects. It can be a challenge, but service is always a privilege. Nationwide median housing values, the blue line, have increased significantly in the last 35 years, while median household incomes, the orange line, have remained relatively static in comparison. Housing affordability is a bigger issue now than when I started. The need is great, and I know the team will continue the work to provide affordable housing. And now, on a personal level, the last 35 years are full of memories for me. Because of trips to DC, I was able to bring the kids along a few times. We got married. I gained a daughter, Amy, who later had a grandson, Damon, in 2012, and we've enjoyed watching him grow up. I was blessed to have the opportunity for my mom and grandma to attend an open house event for home builders in Paulsbo. That same project you saw earlier was shovels stuck in the ground for the groundbreaking. And of course, this project was led by Dean Nail. My son Kenny was interested in science and video games and creating. He was a member of his high school's rifle club and cross-country team. His senior year, he was diagnosed with cancer, but through it all graduated with good grades, and the Make-A-Wish Foundation granted his wish to go to Japan. What an amazing experience that was. We gained a daughter-in-love. Christine and Kenny had planned a wedding a few years ago, but it was delayed due to COVID. We were just able to share in their special day this year, and it's so wonderful to have our family grow. Kenny and Christine are both very creative and talented artists. Christine bakes and decorates cakes and has painted some beautiful artwork. Kenny makes things from scratch, like a fully working lightsaber or a music mixer from an Altoid box. He started out as a silkscreen printer, but recently completed a machinist apprenticeship. Christine is very kind and caring and works with seniors at an assisted living facility. At their recent wedding, one of their friends said, "Kenny is the kindest and most giving person I've ever met. It's the best compliment a mom can hear." My daughter Katie loved reading, hanging out with her friends, dance, and was on the cheerleading squad through middle school and high school. We worked together on several large fundraising events to rebuild homes in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, after Hurricane Katrina, and she participated in 2 rebuilding trips. I cried the day she left for Washington State University and cried when she graduated because she broke the glass ceiling for the women in our family to have accomplished a 4-year degree, and later went on to get her master's. We took many trips across the state to visit her at WSU as she experienced college life. During college, she completed an internship at Disney World, studied abroad in Italy, and accepted her first position in Dallas, Texas. She went on to manage restaurants in California and Arizona and is now working for a commercial real estate company, building her life in Arizona. We didn't always have our act together, but there has been nothing better in this life than being a mom to these two. They grew up into amazing, unique, confident individuals, and I couldn't be more proud. We were blessed to celebrate my grandmother's 90th birthday, then her 100th, and her 102nd before she passed away. I am truly blessed to have had such a wonderful career and so many memories. But now it's time for us. We're going to do more things together, like concerts and theater and travel, and the word that makes my husband's head hurt, projects. Most days you'll find me in the garden, in my hammock swaying in the breeze, or covered in paint refinishing something. It's been an amazing career, serving alongside incredible people whose dedication astounds me each and every day. Keep up the great work. Thank you for all of the memories and for being my coworkers and dear friends. As my friend and mentor Billy Heath taught me to say, it's not goodbye, it's until we meet again. And for one last time, always ask why. Don't keep doing things for the sake of doing them. Be willing to stop doing it the old way and try something new.